Always fun to talk to Doug Fischer. You can find him on the internet, Dougie Fischer on Twitter, ringtv.com. Also, the Ring TV is on Facebook. You can search for them there, Ring TV. Doug always provides some great insight on boxing, and normally we talk about upcoming fights and things that you're going to see. But right now, Doug and I kind of examine the state of boxing. What's wrong with the sport? What can be done to help the sport and fix the sport? Doug Fischer and I discuss that right here on the Sports Buffet Podcast.
Always love doing the Sports Buffet Podcast, and sometimes I think to myself, Bob, what's the best part of why you started this podcast? And one of the first answers that comes to mind is I get to talk to Doug Fischer of the Ring TV. He joins me on the Sports Buffet Podcast, one of the editors for that fine website. And as always, Doug, love having you on. Today we're going to take a little bit of a different approach, so I hope you have your tool belt on. How can we fix boxing?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I get that question a lot, and the same people who ask the question often have their own ideas, their own answers for that problem. The problem that boxing has, and I think the problem that boxing has is that it's not growing as much as other sports, other combat sports. Mainly MMA,
right?
Particularly the UFC brand, Ultimate Fighting Championship brand, which has done nothing but grow really since it was taken over by Zuffa, by the Fertitta brothers, with Dana White at the helm. And so boxing, they're both combat sports that are televised widely in the United States. So a lot of American fans ask, well, especially American fans who are boxing fans who also watch MMA, particularly the UFC, ask, well, how come boxing isn't growing in leaps and bounds the way the UFC does? And some people throw out, well, with the UFC, it's just, it's like it's its own league. Dana White has all the best MMA fighters under contract, or most of them, not all of them, but let's say 80% or so. And you make sure that they fight each other. You make sure that there's good matchups, and of course that's key. But they also point out that there's one championship, that's the UFC championship. The league, the company is its own sanctioning organization.
Right.
Whereas boxing is very fractured. It's certainly not one league. You know what I mean? It's a number of promoters. There's two major promoters, Bob Arum's Top Rank and Oscar De La Hoya's Golden Boy Promotions. And then there are some slightly lower level promoters such as Luda Bella and Garrett Shaw and Kathy Duva. And there are others that are players in the game, such as Goose and Tudor, Dan Goosen's outfit. So you have 4 sanctioning organizations. Let's say 6 or 7 major promoters out there. There's lots of managers and agents like Al Heyman who are also in the mix, and they all have sort of different agendas. And therefore, it gets convoluted. And I agree with that. I don't tell them, no, that's not the problem with boxing. But I think there are certain things that are easier to fix than others.
Right.
And honestly, I don't think we're ever going to get all of the American promoters together to somehow form some sort of boxing league, or all sort of join each other, all sort of form one huge mega conglomerate, and do away with the sanctioning organizations. I think the sanctioning organizations are part of boxing. I don't necessarily think they're bad, although I do believe that the alphabet boys, the WBC, the WBA, the WBO, and the IBF, they do complicate matters, they do confuse the public, and they do come up with some really wacky stuff, that only serves their own interest. It doesn't serve the sport, it doesn't really serve the boxers. Certainly doesn't serve the fans. It just serves themselves. It allows them to make a few extra bucks. I'm talking about interim titles and that kind of nonsense,
Now, are you a fan of MMA at all, by the way?
I am a very casual fan.
Okay,
of
me too.
MMA.
Me
and
too.
I've noticed, I've discovered this about myself, which is, it's kind of funny because I really don't have a background in boxing. I mean, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and Springfield, Missouri. A few boxing gyms in Columbus, Ohio, just on the amateur level.
Right.
And amateur boxing, when I was a kid in the 70s, was fairly strong in that region. It's not so much anymore. But from 5th grade through high school, I grew up in Springfield, Missouri, and there were no boxing gyms, and boxing was not really a it wasn't a sport that everybody followed. Football and baseball were the two main sports there that kids played or whatever. And if you were in any sort of combat sport, it was either karate, taekwondo, or wrestling.
Right.
In high school. And my brothers and I wrestled, and I learned the basics of karate because my uncle is a black belt who had his own school in New Orleans. So we learned the basics of I guess Kempo style karate, and I learned a little bit later the basics of taekwondo, and I did that kind of stuff. So you would think I would have an appreciation having a martial arts foundation and wrestling. But when I watch MMA, the only time I'm really excited is when one guy hits the other guy with his fist and the other guy goes down. That's the only time. Like when they're on the ground, I have mild interest. I watch, and the folks I watch MMA with are really into it.
Right.
And so when they see somebody get somebody in the arm bar or a rear naked chokehold or whatever,
right.
They're like, wow, okay, it's over. The fight's over. I'm like, yeah, the fight's over.
Right.
And who cares? I'm just like, okay, well, I'm not, when they're rolling on the ground and they're doing the jujitsu and they're getting submission holds and somebody taps, I'm never really satisfied. Now, if I'm watching two guys get in there, and I mean, there's some grappling, but then they get back up, and there's kicks, and there's knees, and that kind of thing. But ultimately, one guy lands a shot, it's a right hand, or it's a hook, or it's even a jab, or it's a body shot, and the other guy gets hurt, or the other guy goes down. So I'm like, man, I'm excited.
Right.
Because it's pretty much like boxing. That tells you all you need to know. I mean, I'm a boxing fan, and with MMA, to me, it's just the same way that you and I will talk about boxing to somebody who's a very casual fan of boxing, and they know Floyd Mayweather and know Manny Pacquiao. And they may not even know their names. They might call Floyd Merriweather.
Right.
And they might call Pacquiao that Filipino guy. You know what I mean? That's how I am with MMA. I'm like, oh, yeah, there's that guy. GSP, right? Yeah, he's Canadian, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, and Silva, right? He's something else, right? Okay, right. I can't tell you anything about him.
Yeah,
but I recognize them when I see them, and I will watch, but I don't follow it. I don't follow the sport.
Yeah, me too. I mean, when I go over to a friend's house and watch a UFC or something, I will fully admit that I'm probably one of the most annoying people to watch UFC with, because I'm always like, all right, what's happening? What's he doing there? Because, I just don't know it. Like, I know boxing, and, I mean, some people can call boxing boring, but you and I like it, so that's all that matters right now.
And here's the thing about boxing, though. I mean, it's boring when the wrong matchups are made.
Right.
But when the right matchups are made, boxing is as good as it's ever been. I mean, the fighters aren't, as athletes, the fighters aren't any less than the fighters of the Golden Age and of the Silver Age and of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now, there's certain technique that's fallen off on average. I don't think they're as well conditioned as the boxing athletes of the 70s and the 80s. I think some of these conditioning gurus and conditioning coaches are they're farces, and they don't really prepare. They get the guys, boxers looking in great shape, but these guys are, still gassed when it's like round 6 and round 7
right.
of a fight that's not even a barn burner. You know what I mean? But as far as heart and as far as willingness to give your all, there's still plenty of fighters like that. And when you put them in the ring together, they deliver. You know what I mean? I mean, Corrales versus Castillo, that first fight, Jose Luis Castillo and the late Diego Corrales.
One of my favorites.
As far as action and drama, I mean, that fight's as good as any of those, fights between, Tony DeMarco and Carmen Basilio, or any of those all-time great slugfests. As you go to, you turn the page back to the 50s or the early 60s. The problem with boxing is that this great product is not out there for mass consumption. And I don't even know if I would have become a boxing fan the way I am if, for starters, Muhammad Ali wasn't the heavyweight champ of the world in 1970. But it wasn't just that the heavyweight champion of the world was this great personality. he was on regular television. He was on ABC Wide World of Sports, cutting it up with Howard Cosell. So I was aware of boxing. The 1976 Olympics definitely helped the sport a lot, and a lot of those guys, particularly Sugar Ray Leonard, when they turned pro, we were all America. I say we as Americans. Any American that has any sporting interest was ready to watch them and see how far they would develop. And some of these guys, particularly Leonard, went on to do great things. But I'm not sure I would have become a hardcore fan if the guys who aren't like the superstars, not the Alis and the Leonards, but the guys who were just the top contenders weren't fighting on network television all the time, and they were. And when I was ready to really absorb the sport, when I wanted to, the boxing bug bit me to the point where I had to read everything about boxing, and I wanted to see everything about boxing, and I wanted to catch up on what I missed. It was all there for me to consume. The boxing magazines were there, and boxing. If I missed it on TV, if there was something that was closed circuit, or something that was on HBO first or whatever, it was going to be on Tuesday Night Fights or Network or ESPN a week later on tape delay, and I didn't mind that. I mean, as long as I got to see it, if I heard there was a great fight and I happened to miss it, I could catch it again. On a different platform, and I even caught up a lot with VHS. I didn't see the rematch between Sugar Ray Leonard and Thomas Hearns. When was that fight? Was that '89? I was in college. It was probably finals or whatever.
Right.
And I just couldn't find a place to watch the fight, which was probably closed circuit. But I mean, by the end of that year, I remember there was a VHS tape called, I think it was called The War.
Right.
And it packaged both fights. It packaged the classic 1981 first encounter and the rematch with all kinds of filler in between. And I think the version on the tape was the network version, which might have been CBS because I think it was CBS because the commentator was Tim Ryan and the late Gil Clancy.
Right.
I love those guys. That duo happened to be like my favorite commentating crew, so that was cool. But the bottom line is, I'm in college, and I've got the boxing bug, but obviously I'm taking classes, I'm trying to graduate, and trying to be a good student, so it's not like I can, sometimes I have to miss boxing or whatever, but I would be shopping at like a Kmart in Xenia, Ohio, which wasn't far from the college that I went to, Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, and there would be like a bin, by the checkout line that was filled with just a hodgepodge of VHS tapes. I mean, it was everything from the Three Stooges to cartoons to TV shows, but there would be boxing not CDs. I'm sorry, it was before DVD, but boxing tapes in there, and there was one which chronicled. It was like it kind of chronicled the first 10 years of the Top Rank Boxing series on ESPN.
Right.
It was hosted by Al Bernstein.
Yep.
Picked that up right away. You know what I mean? I was like, because there was lots of fights that I missed, and then I picked up The War, and I picked up NBC put out a series just called The Great Fights.
Right.
That which showed like all of Ali's great fights, like the Ali Frazier 1 and 3, and the Thrilla in Manila, and some of the great middleweight fights, and it had it was moderated by a panel that included Marv Albert. He was kind of like the head of the panel, and Dr. Ferdy Pacheco, right, and the old Mongoose, the great Archie Moore. There was a great trainer, what's his name? He worked with all those Lou Duva fighters. Benton, Georgie Benton.
Right.
Yeah, he was on the panel at least sometimes. So this great panel. Angelo Dundee was on the panel, and so they would show the fight, and then after 3 or 4 rounds or whatever, they would go to this panel, and they were discussing this fight, this great fight, and obviously if it was a fight with Ali, then you had Angelo Dundee there and Freddie Pacheco to give you this insider view of all that. So I was able to just absorb all of this incredible rich history of boxing. And it was there for me to see, even if I didn't have cable, and of course I didn't have cable, and I didn't always have access to television, but I was somehow able to follow the sport as closely as I wanted to, because it was out there for mass consumption. And now it isn't. That's the difference.
Right.
That's the difference between late 80s, early 90s, and right now. Right now, you don't see world-class boxing, truly elite fighters, unless you have HBO or Showtime, or you're willing to plunk down $60 to $75 for a pay-per-view.
Right,
and that's the bottom line. If there's one thing that can change, this has been a very long-winded answer to a really complicated question, because there's a lot of answers. Right. But I think the main thing that boxing could change is to get the product out, and it takes sacrifice, and it can't just be the promoters, can't just be the networks. It's got to come from the fighters and their managers, because they have to be willing, and I'm talking about the world class, the so-called elite. If enough of them were willing to take a considerable pay cut and go to the promoters and say, hey, listen, I'm willing to, instead of making $1.5 million, I'm willing to settle for whatever, $500,000,
right,
even $250,000, if I can fight on network television.
Yeah, I've never heard of people giving back money, though.
With the network.
I've never heard of people giving back money. I've never heard of people giving back money.
It doesn't happen. I know. And that's the problem. But honestly, I'm going to say, and you know this because you follow the sport. The sport is good. I mean, there's so many awesome fights that we forget.
Right.
I mean, I think most fight fans have already forgotten how good of a rematch that fight between Juanma Lopez and Orlando Salido was. That was earlier this year.
Yep.
That fight was awesome. Now, in the 80s and even the 90s, that fight would probably have been on network television. If it was the 80s, who knows? Maybe it would have been, it could have found a prime time slot, But even if it was the late 80s and early 90s, it probably would have been on TV, on NBC, CBS, or ABC on a Saturday afternoon.
Right. Well, let me.
And a lot of people would have saw it, and a lot of people who were not fight fans might have been bitten by the bug.
Right.
And from that point on, would have tried to absorb as much boxing as they could, and that's not happening. And that is something that the UFC has, and that's they have their pay-per-view, they have that whole money structure, but they also put a lot of quality programming on basic cable. They did very well with that show, the reality series being on Spike, and they had lots of shows that were on Spike TV or whatever. And that when they did their deal with Fox, it wasn't just for Fox Sports Net. I mean, it was for the real network, for Fox Network, to show major fights. They're not giving the free TV crappy fights.
Right.
So people are being introduced to mixed martial arts and the UFC brand. And that's not happening.
Yeah. Before I get into another question I have about boxing in terms of making it better, one thing you touched on there is that, I think reality TV is big amongst a lot of people today. I mean, pretty much everybody has at least one favorite reality TV show, whether it's garbage reality or good reality, like I like to call it, that somebody likes. But anyway, with that being said, The Ultimate Fighter was on Spike. I know ESPN at one point had The Contender. Why hasn't boxing really been able to capitalize off a reality TV type thing?
I don't know, because the sport lends itself to reality TV. As HBO's 24/7 has shown us. Before 24/7, HBO had the countdown shows.
Right.
And I think Showtime did a really good job with the Fight Camp 360 series.
Right.
It lends itself to that. It's just, the participants have to be willing. And there has to be the promoters and the networks have to come together and be willing to spend the dollars and the time to produce it.
Did you like The Contender?
I didn't dislike it.
Mm-hmm.
I liked parts of it. I didn't like the whole with the first season. I didn't like that. I wasn't into the whole team concept, the whole West Coast East Coast thing.
Right.
I didn't like those weird little feats of strength or whatever, those little weird physical contests they had to do to kind of position themselves to the matches. That didn't seem realistic to me. What I liked about it, though, is that it gave a voice, and it gave a face and a voice to fighters who were not considered world class, to fighters who were passed over by the major promoters and were not deemed good enough to fight on Showtime or HBO. It gave them a face, and in the case of Sergio Mora, it gave him a chance to prove that he could be a world-class fighter. You know what I mean? Because
right.
he was completely dismissed, when he turned pro, and a lot of those other guys. And it showed. It showed that if you just give these people the exposure that all boxers used to have in previous decades, they could become attractions in their own area, such as Peter Manfredo in the New England area.
Right.
Particularly in Providence, but even throughout New England. For many years, Manfredo sold lots and lots of tickets. And for somebody like Sergio Mora, no, he didn't become an attraction in Los Angeles, although the Contender, I think the year after the first series, they did a fairly successful show at Staples Center. I mean, I'm pretty sure they did like $1 million gate, which is saying something. But, it gave him that platform to get his name out there and to prove that, he could be a real contender, not just a contender in name. And, the fact that he beat a terrific elite fighter in Vernon Forrest to win the junior middleweight, the WBC junior middleweight title. I mean, I think that was some vindication for Mora and even that TV series. But I enjoyed the first two seasons. The first season was on NBC, and the second season was on ESPN. And I thought ESPN was a good fit with that. But I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of the series, and I'm not quite sure why it didn't work or why the boxing promoters haven't tried to emulate what Mark Burnett did with the Contender and kind of integrate it more into obviously the real industry. And I think maybe that was one of the problems with the Contenders when they first came up with it and did it. Burnett, and the people who worked with him, they wanted it to sort of exist as its own sort of league. And sort of a separate universe from the rest of the boxing world. They didn't really want to. They didn't want to do business with the other promoters. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it kind of, it got kind of old with these guys just fighting each other. The same folks that participated in season 1 and season 2. And the fact of the matter is, the guys that were available for them to side, for the most part, they were not truly world class. There were a few guys who were, fairly solid, like Manfredo and Mora. Who's the guy? Can't even think of his name. Jesse Brinkley.
Right.
There were a few others. They were decent, but really, once they stepped up to the world class level, they were B-sides. In terms of their ability. And a lot of those guys, most of them, I'm going to say like 80% of the folks who participated in all of the Contender series. I think it had like 4 seasons. I think most of them were like C-level fighters, There was only so far they could go with those guys, but the concept, I think, was a good one.
A lot of people, too, will say there's no such thing as bad publicity as long as you spell the name right. With that being said, does boxing need more people like Floyd Mayweather Jr. or less people like Floyd Mayweather Jr.?
I think Floyd Mayweather's persona is fine.
It's a character.
I even like Adrian Broner. I like Adrian Broner. I mean, it gets annoying. I think boxing could use a few more personalities. I don't think everybody should act like that. That'll turn people off.
Right.
Well, the problem with Floyd Mayweather is that he's at a point in his career where he only needs to fight once a year, and he only wants to fight once a year, and that's not enough. If the best guy in boxing with bright personality only fights once a year, then really every time he fights, it needs to be the biggest fight possible, and that's not what we've been getting with Floyd. I mean, we've been getting decent fights with Floyd, But really, I mean, Floyd fighting Victor Ortiz, that's not going to do it, particularly in the way that fight went down, the way it ended. Who's Floyd going to fight? You know what I mean? It's like that persona only goes so far. I mean, it's great. I mean, he's got like 1 million plus Twitter followers. HBO's in love with them. He presses people's buttons. He wears the bad guy hat very well, and that's we do. We need personalities like that, but it's only as good as the fights themselves. The fighter still has to challenge himself. He still has to fight the best opposition out there that's available, and needs to fight more often. And if that guy is not going to fight more often, then the imitators, the other guys who act like him, try to put on that sort of swag or whatever, they need to fight more often, and they need to fight really good fights. Then it's great, you know. Particularly if you have, you know, the opposing fighters, you know, who are hopefully on their level, have a conflicting personality. You know, that you get that sort of good guy, bad guy thing.
Right.
That's great.
Right.
That's always good for a promotion. So I think a Floyd Mayweather personality is fine. I don't think everyone should be like that. You certainly shouldn't fake it. If you're like that, if you really are like that, it's in your kind of nature to kind of be that rascal, the way Adrian Broner is, go for it. But you still, at the end of the day, you still got to be a fighter. You still got to step in there. You got to be professional. You got to make weight. You know, you got to get in there and deliver. And if you're going to talk that talk, you need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, you know, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they're just really, I mean, with elite, quote-unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just 2 subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Walk. Need to. I think walk. I'm trying to guess what I'm. But I'd say. I mean, as online boxing needs more charismatic personality needs to get that and more. And I think personalities are out there. Just have really been given, you know, full exposure. They have exposed, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they're just. I mean, a quote unquote box, sort of really regularly being rise by television, by just subscription cable subscription a network and show HBO time. Really, there really aren't enough dates. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, you know, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they're just really, I mean, with elite, quote-unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just 2 subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Walk. Need to. I think walk. I'm trying to guess what I'm. But I'd say. I mean, as online boxing needs more charismatic personality needs to get that and more. And I think personalities are out there. Just have really been given, you know, full exposure. They have exposed, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they're just. I mean, a quote unquote box, sort of really regularly being rise by television, by just subscription cable subscription a network and show HBO time. Really, there really aren't enough dates. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, you know, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they're just really, I mean, with elite, quote-unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just 2 subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Walk. Need to. I think walk. I'm trying to guess what I'm. But I'd say. I mean, as online boxing needs more charismatic person definitely needs to get that and more. And I think personalities are out there just have really been given, full experience. They have exposed, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they just, I mean, a quote-unquote box sort of really regularly being rise by television, just subscription cable subscription works a network and shows HBO time. Really, there really aren't in dates. You need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, I mean, with elite, quote-unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to I think walk. I'm trying to guess what I'm. But I'd say, I mean, is online boxing or needs more charismatic person definitely needs to get that and more. And I think personalities are out there just have really been given, full experience. They have exposed, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they just, I mean, a quote-unquote box sort of really regularly being rise by television, just subscription cable subscription works a network and shows HBO time. Really, there really aren't in dates. You need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, I mean, with elite, quote-unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to, I think, walk. I'm trying to guess what I'm. But I'd say, I mean, is online boxing or needs more charismatic person definitely needs to get that and more. And I think personalities are out there just have really been given, full experience. They have exposed, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they just, I mean, a quote-unquote box sort of really regularly being rise by television, just subscription cable subscription works a network and shows HBO time. Really, there really aren't in dates. You need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, I mean, with elite, quote-unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to, I think, walk. I'm trying to guess what I'm. But I'd say, I mean, is online boxing or needs more charismatic person definitely needs to get that and more. And I think personalities are out there just have really been given, full experience. They have exposed, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they just, I mean, a quote-unquote box sort of really regularly being rise by television, just subscription cable subscription works a network and shows HBO time. Really, there really aren't in dates. You need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, I mean, with elite, quote-unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to, I think, walk. I'm trying to guess what I'm. But I'd say, I mean, is online boxing or needs more charismatic person definitely needs to get that and more. And I think these are personalities out there just have really been given, full experience. They have exposed, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they just, I mean, a quote-unquote box sort of really regularly being raised by television to just substitute cable subscription works a network and show HBO time. Really, there really aren't in states. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, I mean, with elite, quote-unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to walk. I'm trying to guess what I'm. But I'd say, I mean, is online boxing needs more charismatic person definitely needs to get that and more. And I think these are personalities out there just have really been given, full experience. They have exposed, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they just, I mean, a quote-unquote box sort of really regularly being raised by television to just substitute cable subscription works a network and show HBO time. Really, there really aren't in states. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, I mean, with elite, quote-unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to walk. I'm trying to guess what I'm. But I'd say, I mean, is online boxing needs more charismatic person definitely needs to get that and more. And I think these are personalities out there just have really been given, full experience. They have exposed, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they just, I mean, a quote-unquote box sort of really regularly being raised by television to just substitute cable subscription works a network and show HBO time. Really, there really aren't in states. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, I mean, with elite, quote-unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to walk. I'm trying to guess what I'm. But I'd say, I mean, is online boxing needs more charismatic person definitely needs to get that and more. And I think these are personalities out there just have really been given, full experience. They have exposed, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they just, I mean, a quote-unquote box sort of really regularly being raised by television to just substitute cable subscription works a network and show HBO time. Really, there really aren't in states. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, I mean, with elite, quote-unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to walk. I'm trying to guess what I'm. But I'd say, I mean, is online boxing needs more charismatic Personality needs to get that and more. And I think those personalities are out there. Just have really been given, full experience. They have exposure, haven't been examined yet. It's really they just. I mean, a quote unquote box for the really regularly being raised by television. I just subscribe cable subscription a network and show HBO time. Really, there aren't in dates. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, with elite, quote unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to walk. I'm trying to get what I'm. But I'd say, is online boxing needs more charismatic personality needs to get that and more. And I think personalities are out there. Just have really been given, full experience. They have exposure, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they just, a quote unquote box for the really regularly being raised by television. I just subscribe cable subscription a network and show HBO time. Really, there aren't in dates. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, with elite, quote unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to walk. I'm trying to get what I'm. But I'd say, is online boxing needs more charismatic personality needs to get that and more. And I think those personalities are out there. Just have really been given, full experience. They have exposure, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they just, a quote unquote box for the really regularly being raised by television. I just subscribe cable subscription a network and show HBO time. Really, there aren't in dates. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, with elite, quote unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to walk. I'm trying to get what I'm. But I'd say, is online boxing needs more charismatic personality needs to get that and more. And I think those personalities are out there. Just have really been given, full experience. They have exposure, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they just, a quote unquote box for the really regularly being raised by television. I just subscribe cable subscription a network and show HBO time. Really, there aren't in dates. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they just really, with elite, quote unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. Need to walk. I'm trying to get what I'm. But I'd say, is online boxing needs more charismatic person definitely needs to get that and more. And I think personalities are personalities out there just have really been given, full exposure. They have exposure, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they're just, I mean, a quote unquote box for the really regularly being raised by television by just subscription cable subscription works a network and show HBO time. Really, there really aren't in states. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they're just really, I mean, with elite, quote unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. I'm trying to guess what I'm, but I'd say, I mean, as online boxing needs more charismatic person definitely needs to get that and more. And I think these are personalities out there just have really been given, full exposure. They have exposure, haven't been examined yet. It's really, they're just, I mean, a quote unquote box for the really regularly being raised by television by just subscription cable subscription works a network and show HBO time. Really, there really aren't in states. Need to walk the walk. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But I mean, bottom line is, boxing needs more charismatic personalities. It definitely needs more of that. And I think those personalities are out there. They just haven't really been given, full exposure yet. They haven't been exposed yet, and they're just really, I mean, with elite, quote unquote, elite boxing really being regularly televised by just two subscription cable networks, HBO and Showtime, there really aren't enough dates. I'm trying to guess what I'm, but I'd say, I mean, as online boxing needs more charismatic person definitely needs to get that and more. And I think these are personalities out there just have really been given,